Wow, you are officially on the other side of Module 2. Guys, welcome back to your Professional Diploma in Nutrition with Shaw Academy. In today's lesson, we will be discussing the ins and outs of a plant-based diet. One of my favorite sayings in this regard is eat more, not too much, and mostly plants, which was famously said by Michael Pollan. Did you know that going vegetarian or vegan can help to reduce your average carbon footprint? Typically, a meat eater's diet will emit up to 2,055 kilograms of carbon dioxide per year, whilst a vegetarian and a vegan diet will only emit 1,391 and 1,055 kilograms per year respectively. Guys, that is almost half. So if your primary concern is the well-being of the environment, then changing to a more plant-based diet truly has its benefits. The objectives for today's lesson are to understand what is a vegetarian and what are the different types of vegetarians. We'll look at the umbrella term, we'll also look at pescatarians, flexitarians, and vegans. We'll look at some common reasons why some people choose to be vegetarians. We'll look at vegetarianism and health, as well as the cons of a vegetarian diet. Let's start off our lesson by understanding more about the various types of vegetarians and what each entails. Let's start off with the umbrella term vegetarian. So many people misuse this term and say that they are vegetarian if they simply avoid red meat. So guys, this often happens in the United States. A true vegetarian excludes flesh foods from their diet, and as we'll soon learn, this may or may not include eggs or dairy products. Flesh foods include meat, for example, beef, pork, and lamb, poultry like chicken and turkey, wild game like venison, seafood, which includes your fish and your shellfish, and any products made from these flesh foods. Others, myself included, have decided to embrace the best of both worlds to be what they call a semi-vegetarian or a flexitarian. This means that you base most of your diet on a plant-based way of eating, but also occasionally eat meat or animal products. Another type of semi-vegetarian is a pescatarian. This is when a person avoids all land-based animals but does consume fish and seafood together with their plant-based diet. A lacto-ovo-vegetarian would avoid all flesh food but include dairy and eggs as well as their products in their diet. And a lacto-vegetarian would avoid all eggs but include dairy and dairy products. The most extreme form of vegetarianism is to be a vegan. A distinction must be made between a dietary vegan and an ethical vegan. A dietary vegan will not consume flesh foods or any animal-derived substances, whilst an ethical vegan will take it a step further and oppose the use of animals for any use. So they, for example, will not wear leather. So guys, let's test your listening skills. Is this statement true or false? A vegetarian is a person who only avoids red meat. So tell me guys, is that statement true or is that statement false? Okay guys, so have you typed your answer into Morpheus? Remember that I highlighted that this is a misuse of the word vegetarian. If you only avoid red meat, then you are probably not a vegetarian, or you are at best a flexitarian. Vegetarians typically don't consume any flesh foods, so no meat, poultry, or fish, or any of their byproducts. So guys, what is the reason that some people decide to become a vegetarian? The truth is that there are so many reasons, and one person's decision may be vastly different from another's. So let's look at the top 6 reasons that this decision is made for most. It could be due to a cultural preference. So we typically see vegetarian diets more in the Eastern cultures than in the West. This being said, vegetarianism in the West is definitely gaining much traction at the moment. Religion may also prescribe vegetarianism. So for example, Hinduism or Buddhism. Some may choose this way of eating for ethical reasons, so perhaps due to their compassion towards animals or perhaps a desire to protect the environment. Occasionally, it may be done due to economical reasons because the cost of animal proteins is far higher than that of plant proteins. It can also be due to taste preferences. So guys, believe it or not, some people just don't like the taste of flesh foods and they avoid this based simply on this reason. Some change their style of eating to a vegetarian or a plant-based one because of the proposed health benefits when following it correctly. We'll go into this a little bit later in today's lesson, but a vegetarian diet can help lower your risk of chronic disease, and it can also assist with the therapeutic management of various diseases. In a male survey of consumers' perceived attitudes towards vegetarian diets, 415 randomly selected adults identified increased fiber intake, reduced saturated fat intake, and chronic disease prevention as the main health benefits associated with a vegetarian diet. Lastly, we have your age. So your age may affect your decision to be a vegetarian. Researchers found that adolescents or teenagers may choose to become a vegetarian to differentiate themselves from their meat-eating parents. This is a way that they can exert their individuality and their autonomy separate from their parents. In addition to this, an adolescent may also express moral or ethical concerns over animal welfare and the environment, and very occasionally they may change their dietary habits in order to lose weight, as this is a socially acceptable way to reduce their energy and dietary fat intake. A little bit more on this a bit later. So one of the things I mentioned is the environmental impact. Let's hone into this a little bit more. A variety of sources confirm that a vegetarian diet is more environmentally sustainable for a variety of reasons. It uses up fewer natural resources, meaning less water and less fossil fuels to produce, and this way of eating is also associated with less environmental damage. So for example, if you were to substitute beans for beef in your diet, this would significantly reduce your environmental footprint. Let's have a look at how substantially this could make an impact. So we know that 1 kilogram of protein from kidney beans uses up 18 times less land, 10 times less water, 9 times less fuel, 12 times less fertilizer, and 10 times less pesticide in comparison to producing 1 kilogram of protein from beef. And just to top it all off, beef production also increases the amount of manure waste produced more than any other animal food production worldwide. And so guys, by decreasing your intake of beef, even marginally, you could have a positive effect on the environment. More than one health agency promotes and encourages a plant-based way of eating, and this includes the American Institute for Cancer Research, who suggests that Americans consume at least 2/3 of their dietary intake from vegetables, fruits, whole grains, and beans. In addition to this, the 2015 to 2020 Dietary Guidelines for Americans mentions vegetarian diets as one of the 3 most healthful dietary patterns. The other 2 are the healthy US style and the healthy Mediterranean style. Now, if you're feeling a bit overwhelmed and you're worried that you might not be able to stick to being a vegetarian, rest assured you can reap most of the benefits by even just being a vegetarian some of the time. Vegetarianism exists on a continuum, with individuals intensifying or relaxing their dietary restrictions over time. For example, a cross-sectional survey of 90 current vegetarians, 35 former vegetarians, and 68 omnivores in Vancouver found that 56 current vegetarians had increased their dietary restrictions over time, while 51 of the current vegetarians ate fish occasionally and 14 ate chicken occasionally. Okay guys, so you can be a vegetarian some of the time. It's really absolutely okay. You do the best with what you've got. Now you may be asking yourself, but is a vegetarian diet appropriate? According to the American Dietetic Association position paper on vegetarian diets, an appropriately planned vegetarian diet, including a vegan diet, can be nutritionally adequate, may provide health benefits, and can also aid in the prevention and treatment of certain diseases. It is also deemed to be appropriate for all stages in the life cycle, including pregnancy, lactation, and infancy, as well as childhood, adolescence, older adults, and even athletes. Guys, if you are interested in this paper, it is a fantastic read, and I will give you the link at the end in your resources. Remember that any nutritional concerns or deficiencies can most definitely be avoided through planning a well-balanced vegetarian diet. Some of the common characteristics of a vegetarian diet that results in these multiple health benefits is that they are typically low in saturated fat, as well as high in vegetables, fruits, whole grains, legumes, soy products, nuts, and seeds. Guys, this means that this type of dietary pattern is incredibly rich in fiber as well as phytochemicals. Right, guys, so think back to our previous lessons together and tell me, what do you think phytochemicals are? Are they A, macronutrients, B, synthetic nutrients, C, plant nutrients, or are they D, vitamins? Guys, think all the way back to lesson 5 of module 1, where we spoke about phytochemicals, and I've most definitely mentioned them in excess in the last couple of lessons. What do you think the answer is? Right, guys, the answer is, of course, C. Phytochemicals or phytonutrients are our plant nutrients. Right, guys, so practically, how on earth are we going to go about incorporating vegetarian principles into your current diet? Well, guys, it's pretty much the same as an omnivorous diet, but instead of animal proteins, a vegetarian, depending on what type of vegetarian you choose to be, will replace these with plant proteins. Remember that a vegetarian avoids flesh foods, so lean meats and poultry, while a pescatarian will include fish and shellfish, and an ovo-vegetarian will include eggs. A lacto-vegetarian will include milk and milk products, so including your creams, fermented milks, yogurts, and cheeses. And all vegetarians should strive to include minimally processed plant proteins in their diets regularly, like legumes, soy, and high-protein seeds and grains like quinoa, hemp, and chia seeds. Now, of course, guys, please do remember that any diet has the potential to be healthy or unhealthy. A vegetarian diet is exactly the same. It can be a diet filled with refined carbohydrates, solid fats, and added sugars, and it will still be vegetarian, but you will definitely not reap the proposed health benefits. As I've said time and time again, variety is key when it comes to a healthy diet and healthy eating patterns. If you allow any diet to become monotonous, you stand the risk for nutritional deficiencies. Remember, if you eat the same thing day in and day out, vegetarian or not, you are getting only one set of nutrients. And guys, we need a variety of nutrients every single day in order to be healthy and to prevent disease. Anyone wanting to follow a vegetarian diet must also be cognizant of their processed food intake. Just as with omnivores, in order to be a healthy vegetarian, you must strive for the majority of your diet to come from minimally processed foods in lieu of highly processed foods. Highly processed foods are usually devoid of naturally occurring nutrients, and so if you eat mainly these, you will risk a nutritional deficiency. Now, some of you may be wondering where you can get more information and ideas on meatless meals. So guys, I love the resource www.meatlessmonday.com. Meatless Monday is a global movement with a simple message: one day a week, cut the meat, right? So it was launched in 2003, and Meatless Monday is a non-profit initiative whose goal is to reduce meat consumption by 15% for personal health and for the health of the planet. They provide information, news, recipes, and free promotional materials to help individuals, schools, restaurants, hospitals, food companies, and entire communities to start each week with a commitment to eating healthy, environmentally friendly, and meat-free meals. They're now entering its second decade. Meatless Monday is embraced in over 40 countries in over 20 languages, demonstrating the universal appeal of an idea that is simple to understand and easy to do. So guys, definitely pop onto their website and give Meatless Monday a try. Let's run through some of the ways to assess a vegetarian diet. So guys, the first step is to assess your energy intake. One of the reasons why a vegetarian diet is an effective method to lose weight is that most vegetarian foods are naturally lower in energy and fat, remembering that they are low energy, but they are nutrient dense. In addition to this, vegetarian foods are often higher in fiber and more bulky than non-vegetarian options, and this means that in order to match your previous energy intake, you might have to eat more. If you don't want to lose weight, then changing to a vegetarian diet might cause unintended weight loss. The one complaint I've experienced when a person does choose to become a vegetarian is that they often feel fatigued. Guys, this is a telltale sign that you are not consuming enough energy. How can your body work at capacity if it is running low on energy? If this is happening to you, you need to focus on including more energy-dense foods in your plan. The same goes for children and adolescents. Guys, children grow rapidly, and for this reason, it's very important that energy-dense options be included in their diets on a regular basis to avoid growth faltering. When someone becomes a vegetarian, the first thing that usually springs to most people's minds is, are you eating enough protein? So guys, remember, although vegetarians may have a lower protein intake than non-vegetarians, they are usually not deficient. They usually consume more than enough protein to either meet or exceed the recommended dietary allowance, or RDA, if they consume a diet that is varied with an adequate intake of calories. Animal protein is also the main source of saturated fat in an omnivore's diet, and so when this is reduced or eliminated, naturally the diet becomes lower in fat, but more specifically saturated fat. An outdated way of thinking was to ensure that each meal the vegetarian chose had at least 2 forms of complementary protein. This was in an effort to ensure that the vegetarian consumed all 9 essential amino acids in one meal. We now know that this is not necessary to get all 9 in one meal or even in one day. But what does seem to be important, however, is that the vegetarian consumes a variety of plant-based proteins regularly. The term complete or incomplete is thus also incorrect because it places a negative connotation on incomplete or plant proteins, which, as we can see, is not that important. Some great plant-based proteins include legumes like your beans, your lentils, and your chickpeas. We have our high-protein pseudo-cereals like quinoa. We have protein products like seitan, which you can buy in the shop or you can make it at home. And lastly, there are also a number of soya protein products such as edamame beans, which are young raw soya beans, more mature soya beans, tofu, soy protein, as well as tempeh. Right guys, next question. What is the recommended dietary allowance, or RDA, for protein for a healthy adult? So you're going to have to rack your brain and think back to our lesson on proteins. Is the answer A, 0.8 grams per kilogram per day, B, 8 grams per kilogram per day, or is it C, 2 grams per kilogram per day? Right guys, is the answer A, B, or C? Why don't you pop your answer into Morpheus right away? Guys, remember, the more you interact with us, the more interesting these lessons are, and you can definitely share your answers with the classroom. Let's see if we're all getting the right answers, okay? Right guys, so remember, the answer is indeed A. The recommended dietary allowance for protein for a healthy adult is 0.8 grams per kilogram per day. From a carbohydrate perspective, as with non-vegetarians, I encourage vegetarians to choose minimally processed starches like whole grains and high fiber starches, and also to limit their refined carbohydrate intake, including limiting highly processed starches. Remember that whole grain high fiber starches are naturally more nutritious than their refined carbohydrate counterparts and can actually be a source of protein in the diet, as we've briefly discussed before. From a fat intake perspective, a vegetarian usually consumes adequate amounts of omega-6, but usually need to pay special attention to their omega-3 fatty acid intake, which we know are both essential fatty acids which we need to consume as part of our daily diet because our body cannot make it on its own. 3 sources of omega-3 exist. We have ALA, EPA, and DHA. The latter, so EPA and DHA, are considered to be the active form, and ALA is considered to be the inactive form. ALA can be converted into EPA and DHA, but unfortunately these conversion rates are pretty low, so anywhere between 0.1 and 9%. This conversion rate seems to be higher in those who do need it, so in younger women than in men, perhaps due to their potential for conception at this age, or higher in vegetarians compared to fish eaters. The clinical relevance of a reduced EPA and DHA status among vegetarians and vegans is, however, currently unknown. EPA and DHA are important for the development and maintenance of the brain and the eyes, and may also be incredibly important with regards to your cardiovascular or heart health. Yet vegetarians and vegan children don't appear to experience much impairment in visual or mental development, and vegetarian or vegan adults actually experience reduced risk for cardiovascular disease. Despite not knowing the clinical relevance of the need for elevated levels of EPA and DHA, we can still strive to optimize this ALA conversion rate by limiting excessive intake of dietary omega-6, so for example from concentrated sources like safflower, sunflower, and corn oil, and also to potentially consume more ALA than the RDA of 1.6 and 1.1 grams per day for men and women respectively. Some foods to include in your diet that are higher in ALA are flax seeds or linseed oil. We have our chia seeds, walnuts, hemp seeds, soya beans, and also canola oil. Some people have increased requirements, so for example during pregnancy and lactation, and some have reduced conversion rates, so for example those with hypertension or diabetes. These populations may need an increased intake from DHA-rich sources like supplements made from microalgae, sea vegetables, foods fortified with DHA, as well as omega-3 enriched eggs. Additional concerns with an unplanned vegetarian diet include certain vitamin and mineral deficiencies. Over the next few slides, I'll elaborate on these and explain what you can do to avoid these deficiencies. Vegetarians have been found to have a lower mean serum concentration of vitamin B12 than omnivores. This is due to the fact that vitamin B12 is found mainly in animal food products. Vegans are especially at risk versus lacto-ovo-vegetarians, as dairy and eggs are a source of vitamin B12. Certain foods like nutritional yeast, whilst they are a source of vitamin B12, are not a reliable source, and vegetarians and vegans are encouraged to consume B12 vitamins or fortified foods regularly to prevent a deficiency. A long-term subclinical vitamin B12 deficiency should be avoided, as it has been linked to stroke, dementia, and even poor bone health. Your vitamin D status will depend mainly on your sunlight exposure. Guys, this is why it is known as the sunshine vitamin. Your levels will be impacted by the time of day that you're in the sun, your latitude, air pollution, skin pigmentation, with those with darker skin being more susceptible to deficiency, sunscreen use, how much you cover up, including those who cover up for religious reasons, as well as your age. Now, if you are vitamin D deficient, you can increase your intake through fortified foods, usually through dairy, which may not suit some vegetarians, or you can take a supplement. From a supplemental point of view, I want to highlight that cholecalciferol, or vitamin D3, is sourced from either fish or sheep's wool or lanolin, and it might not be suitable for certain vegetarians. But ergocalciferol, or vitamin D2, is derived from yeast, and so it's suitable for vegans and vegetarians. Although some research does suggest that vitamin D2 is less effective than vitamin D3 in maintaining your serum vitamin D levels, other studies have found them to be equally effective. If your sun exposure and intake of fortified foods is insufficient to meet your needs, a vitamin D supplementation may be recommended. Guys, what's very important to remember here is that vitamin D is a fat-soluble vitamin. This means that it is stored in your body if you take in more than you need. If excessive levels are consumed, then it does have the possibility to reach toxic levels. So guys, it's incredibly vital not just to supplement indiscriminately, but rather to be prudent or ask your doctor to first assess you for a deficiency before you decide to supplement, especially very high dose supplementation. Once again, calcium intake for certain vegetarians, like lacto-ovo-vegetarians, is similar if not higher than meat eaters. The reason for this is they often focus on dairy products as their flesh protein substitutes, or they choose plant-based proteins which are fortified with calcium. This being said, calcium levels may be lower in vegans, and it really depends on what kind of fortified foods they choose. Interestingly, bone fracture risk is similar for lacto-ovo-vegetarians as well as omnivores, but it may be higher in vegans. What I want to highlight here is that calcium is definitely not only found in dairy foods, it's actually also found in abundance in certain plant-based foods. However, the bioavailability, or the amount the body can absorb and utilize, is often lower in plants, most likely due to their oxalate content. Choosing low oxalate greens like bok choy, broccoli, Chinese cabbage, collards, and kale are not only a good source of calcium, but their calcium is also highly bioavailable, so 50 to 60% in fact. Calcium-set tofu and cow's milk, interestingly enough, have the same bioavailability of about 30%, and sesame seeds, almonds, and dried beans have a slightly lower bioavailability between 21 and 27%. Fortified plant milks usually contain calcium carbonate or tricalcium phosphate. Calcium carbonate is absorbed similar to cow's milk, and tricalcium phosphate is substantially lower. Next up on the list is iron. Vegetarians have a similar or higher total iron intake compared to non-vegetarians. However, as they avoid flesh foods, their iron is mainly from non-heme iron sources rather than from heme. Unfortunately, non-heme iron is more sensitive to iron inhibitors more so than heme iron, but it also responds well to iron enhancers. Iron inhibitors include phytates, calcium, and polyphenolics in teas, coffees, herbal teas, and cocos. Other ways to improve iron bioavailability is to include certain processing methods like soaking and sprouting of beans, grains, and seeds to reduce their phytate level, and fermentation levels may improve bioavailability. Vitamin C and other organic acids also increase absorption and reduce inhibitory effects. Because of this lower bioavailability of iron from a vegetarian diet, the recommended iron intake for vegetarians is 1.8 times that of non-vegetarians. Iron absorption has been studied extensively in the short term. However, in the long term, there is evidence that adaptation to low intakes takes place and involves both an increase in absorption and a decrease in losses. Incidence of iron deficiency anemia among vegetarians is similar to that of non-vegetarians. Although vegetarian adults do have lower iron stores than non-vegetarians, their serum ferritin levels are usually within normal ranges. Zinc intake varies between vegetarians, with some reaching the recommendations and others not. Due to the lower bioavailability of zinc in a vegetarian diet, mainly again because of the phytate content due to the unrefined grains and legumes, zinc requirements may exceed the RDA. Zinc sources include soy products, legumes, grains, cheese, and nuts. Zinc bioavailability can be enhanced through food preparation techniques like soaking or sprouting of beans, grains, and nuts to reduce the binding effect that the phytic acid has on the zinc, and as with iron, combining zinc with foods that have organic acids in them can also increase the absorption to some extent. Some of the health effects that we can expect from a vegetarian diet firstly relates to obesity. Vegetarians typically have a lower BMI than their meat-eating counterparts. There is good quality evidence suggesting that a healthy vegetarian diet is associated with a lower risk of death from ischemic heart disease like a heart attack. This risk reduction is seen in both lacto-ovo vegetarians and vegans. Interestingly, the risk reduction is seen even if they adjusted the results for BMI. This means that although vegetarians do typically have a lower BMI than non-vegetarians, this doesn't seem to be the main factor that influences the reduction in heart disease risk. This risk reduction can be explained in part by differences in blood lipid levels. Typically, studies show that vegetarians have got lower total cholesterol and lower low-density lipoprotein cholesterol levels than non-vegetarians. Factors that may be positively influencing blood lipid levels include higher amounts of fiber, nuts, soy, and plant sterols, and lower levels of saturated fats than from a non-vegetarian's diet. Vegetarians also do consume between 50 and 100% more fiber than non-vegetarians, and vegans have an even higher intake than lacto-ovo vegetarians. Soluble fiber has repeatedly been found to lower total and LDL cholesterol levels and reduce the risk for coronary heart disease. And a diet high in nuts significantly lowers also the total and LDL cholesterol levels. Soy isoflavones may play a role in reducing LDL cholesterol levels and in reducing the susceptibility of LDL to oxidation or damage, which would increase your risk for disease. And lastly, plant sterols, which are found in legumes, nuts, and seeds, whole grains, vegetable oils, and other plant-based foods also reduce cholesterol absorption and lower LDL cholesterol levels. So guys, through all these mechanisms, vegetarians seem to have lower total cholesterol and lower LDL levels. A vegetarian diet may also reduce your risk for type 2 diabetes. This once again can be explained by the fact that vegetarians have a lower BMI, but a higher intake of vegetables, whole grains, legumes, and nuts have also been found to improve insulin sensitivity and also to improve glycemic control or blood sugar levels. Meat and processed meat intake may also be linked to diabetes risk, where positive associations have also been noted. Non-vegetarians are encouraged to limit their intake of red meat to no more than 500 grams cooked per week and avoid processed meats like hot dogs, deli meats, bacon, etc. due to the risk they play in the potential development of certain cancers. One study suggests that vegetarians are also at a lower risk of developing dementia than their non-vegetarian counterparts. This reduced risk may be due to the lower blood pressure seen in vegetarians or due to their higher antioxidant intake. Vegetarians can, however, also have risk factors for dementia. So, for example, poor vitamin B12 status has been linked to an increased risk for dementia. Thus, vitamin B12 intake should be encouraged to avoid this. Vegetarians tend to have an overall cancer rate lower than that of the general population, and this is not confined to smoking-related cancers. Non-vegetarians have a substantially increased risk for both colorectal and prostate cancer compared with vegetarians, but there is no significant difference in risk for lung, breast, uterine, or stomach cancer between the groups after controlling for age, sex, and smoking. Obesity is a significant factor in increasing your risk for cancer at a number of sites, and because the BMI of vegetarians does tend to be lower than that of non-vegetarians, the lighter body weight of the vegetarians may be an important factor. Right guys, so let us end off our lesson at looking at some of the very few cons of a vegetarian diet. Studies have shown that specifically vegans may have a lower bone mineral density, but it is probably not clinically significant, and it seems to be quite similar between lacto-ovo, lacto, and non-vegetarians. There may be an iron or zinc deficiency, specifically where there are increased needs like in pregnancy due to the high phytate diet, which may inhibit zinc bioavailability as we learned. Iron supplementation may also inhibit zinc absorption, and so this is just something to pay careful attention to, and like we said, the processing methods of the foods you're consuming may play a role there. In women who are breastfeeding, vitamin B12 may be severely lacking in vegan mothers. Remember that this can lead to a deficiency in the infant, and if not corrected, can lead to growth failure and permanent damage to the nervous system. So guys, it is imperative that if you are a vegan and if you are breastfeeding or if you are pregnant, that you do consume adequate amounts of vitamin B12, either through fortified foods or through a supplement. Remember guys, that food sources of vitamin B12 at these imperative times may not be adequate for your needs. Lastly, a vegetarian diet can become increasingly restrictive. Now, in our next lesson, we will be speaking about orthorexia, and I will tell you all about it, but this may signal a developing eating disorder, and it's most definitely something I want you guys to really watch out for and be very careful of. Guys, as always, I really enjoyed teaching you today's lesson, and I hope that you all kept up and you found the information to be incredibly interesting. Guys, coming up next, we will be talking about nutrition frequently asked questions, and I will cover topics like food fears, including clean eating and orthorexia, which is definitely on the rise. We'll look at the dirty dozen and organic versus conventional foods. We'll also be touching on future foods and hot trends, including functional foods and superfoods. And I'll also be doing a food and nutrient showdown. Specifically, we'll be looking at milk alternatives, ancient and sprouted grains, and we'll be ending off with weird and wonderful food trends, including placentophagy and IV nutrition therapy. Guys, let's wrap up by recapping what we did learn in today's lesson. So we now know that there are definitely various forms of vegetarianism, and a healthy vegetarian diet is one that contains minimally processed choices. A vegetarian diet can be beneficial for the environment, and vegetarians definitely consume adequate, if not increased levels of most nutrients. The body also is incredibly intelligently designed and adapts to lower intake and bioavailability by increasing absorption and decreasing losses, and that a vegetarian diet benefits definitely outweigh the risks. Guys, I've said it once and I will continue to say it. A huge congratulations and big well done on completing lesson 7. As always, I'm just an email away. If you have any suggestions or feedback, please pop me a mail at support@shoreacademy.com. For today's challenge, I want you guys to tell me if you are a #vegetarian, and if you are not, your challenge is to try and incorporate at least one vegetarian meal in your meal plan for this week. I want you guys to take photos and share your inspiration with me using the #ShoreNutrition. Guys, a huge thank you for attending today's lesson. I really look forward to seeing you next time. Keep safe, keep well, and I'll see you back for lesson 8 of module 2.